This is the next attachment lesson, looking at the role of the father. This is in paper 1 with memory, social and psychopathology. What I want you to do to start off with is have a think about the role of the father. So what role might they play in attachment? What can we learn from a father figure? How do infants interact with their fathers, and why are fathers important attachment figures? Because most of the research focuses on the mother and their role in attachments. So we want to think about why are fathers important and how are they important in terms of attachment. Okay, so when we're thinking about fathers as attachment figures, most of you might think about, when you're thinking about your relationship that you might have with your father, it might be that they're there for play, like your mother's there for your emotional support, but your dad's there when you want to have fun and he plays football with you, or plays games, wrestling, or like fun activities. So when your dad comes in, it's chaos and you're running around and you're playing, but when you're with your mum, like it's a bit more calm and she gives you more emotional support. So when you cry, you go to your mum. Your father might be there in terms of setting rules, so he might be there to tell you off, tell you what's right and wrong, that kind of thing. Okay, so mothers and fathers stereotypically have different roles, but we need to understand how a father's role impacts an infant's attachment and why they are important in terms of attachment. So that's what we're going to look at in today's lesson. So Sharon and Emerson's research that we looked at last lesson when we looked at the stages of attachment, they found that in terms of multiple attachments, 75% of the infants had a secondary attachment with their fathers when they were 18 months old. This might suggest that a father has a specific role in terms of secondary attachment, and it might be that they provide an emotional safety net for infants. This means that it might be kind of, when mum's not available, dad's there for me. It's kind of like a safety net. It's kind of like, if anything happens, I've still got you situation. There has been more research into the role of the father in terms of secondary attachment. So we've got some information here. So Grossman investigated the role of the father, and they found that it was the quality of the child's attachment with the mother, not the father, that was more important in terms of attachment long term. So they did a longitudinal study, and they found that actually the attachment that the infant had with their father wasn't really important in terms of whether a teenager was able to form an attachment and the type of attachments that they formed from being an infant to a teenager. So this shows that the mother is actually more important as a primary attachment figure than the father. But it suggests that fathers might have a role, but this role isn't necessarily to do with helping them form attachments. So Grossman did some more research and suggested that fathers have a different role to mothers, and actually they are more important in terms of play and stimulation. So you learn an awful lot through play as an infant and as a child. So play is really, really important, and it could be that you learn a lot more, such as like risk-taking behaviour, from your fathers, and that's why they are important in terms of being a secondary attachment figure. So to summarise, in terms of secondary attachment, Sharon and Emerson found that 75% of infants when they were 18 months old had a secondary attachment to their fathers. Grossman found that fathers are important for play and stimulation, but mothers are more important for emotional support, and they are more likely to be a primary caregiver. Next, we've got the father as a primary attachment. So, in terms of primary attachment figures, Sharon and Emerson did find that 3% of infants early on had a primary attachment to their father, and we've got research to support fathers as primary attachment figures from Field. So Field found that primary caregiver fathers actually do a lot of the same behaviours as primary caregiver mothers. So they hold their babies, they smile and they imitate their babies, and all of these things are important for synchrony and reciprocity. So it suggests that fathers have the potential to be that primary caregiver, and they have the potential to provide that emotional support. It just could be that it's more unlikely for a father to be a primary caregiver, and that's why it doesn't happen. However, if a father is put in that position to be a primary caregiver, they can do it, and they have the potential to be that individual that provides the emotional support for the infant. So fathers do have the potential to become primary caregivers. It could be that they're just not given the opportunity because it's more likely that a female is going to be a primary caregiver in today's society. Well, maybe not so much in today's society, but in previous times. And we'll come on to that in a little bit. So for primary attachment, Sharon Emerson found that 3% of males in the early stages were primary attachment figures. Field found that fathers can be primary attachment figures, and they can provide emotional support for their infants. So to evaluate, research suggests that the father has an important role, so it shows that the father is important in terms of secondary attachment. And because the father is important in terms of secondary attachment, this would suggest that a child growing up in a same-sex or single-parent female household would therefore suffer because they don't have that secondary attachment figure of a father around. But that doesn't seem to be the case, so we've got like conflicting ideas here. It doesn't really marry up with modern day society, this idea of fathers being really important as a secondary attachment figure, because we have lots of families where fathers are not present and the infants are fine not having that father as a secondary attachment figure. But that could be because within those households they adapt, and it could be that in a same-sex couple, one of them takes on board the role of the father, or in a single-parent family, the mother actually takes time out to provide that fatherly role. So it would be that they would provide play and stimulation along with emotional support, and they would just adapt to include the role of the father as part of their parenting. So it's difficult really to say whether it's important to have a father as that secondary attachment figure, or if it's more important to provide the same things that a secondary attachment figure would provide. It could be as well that in same-sex or single-parent female households, they actually have another member of their friendship group or their family that does provide that secondary attachment, and the research doesn't show that, or it doesn't investigate that. It could be like a grandparent might provide that secondary attachment, or an older sibling, or a cousin, or an auntie, uncle. They might provide the same things that a secondary attachment figure would give. So basically what we're saying is, in evaluation, is the father the important part, or is it the secondary attachment that's the important part, and what goes along with that secondary attachment, so that play and that stimulation? Because if it's the play and stimulation that's important, what we can do is we can make sure that people who are in single parent families, for example, are aware of that, and they're provided with support and resources to ensure that they are able to give play and stimulation alongside emotional support. Like, a lot of that might happen in schools as well. So in terms of evaluation, we have opposing ideas from same-sex or single-parent female households or families, and it might be that single parents or same-sex female parents are able to adapt and provide the play and the stimulation, which is part of that secondary attachment role. Then we've got application, which is part of evaluation as well. So research shows that fathers can be primary attachment figures as well. So if you've got same-sex male couples, they can feel more confident about having a child through surrogacy or adoption. And we can make sure that we provide them with the knowledge and the support available to help them be really good primary caregivers. research also shows that fathers have an important role in terms of helping support the mother. So if fathers are important, not just for secondary attachment, but they can become primary attachment figures, then that means that the mother doesn't have to feel guilty for going back to work. And sometimes it's the female that actually earns more in the family, so it might be more economical for the female to go back to work, and it might be better for the economy in general, because then the female's working more, paying more taxes, etc. And it's better for the household as well, because they've got more money coming in. So sometimes it's better for the female to return to work, and if we know that fathers are important in terms of attachment, then females don't have to feel guilty about that. This might also help reduce the gender pay gap as well, if females are able to go back to work. And then the next one is a sort of economical one as well. So now what happens is the government enable males and females to share, or mother-father to share paternity leave for the first year of a child's life. So it could be that the female does the first 6 months and then the father does the second 6 months, and they're able to split that and share it for that first year, which is really good because it allows that female to get back to work and earning that money, and the father can take on board those other duties and can care for the baby or the infant. So again, that's reducing the gender pay gap, and it's making females feel less guilty for going back to work. And it means as well that they don't necessarily have to put their child in care. It means that they can give that emotional support themselves. They don't have to send that child to daycare. Okay, so just to recap that bit. So real life application, it can help the economy because the female can go back to work and she might be earning more money, so she'll be paying more taxes, and that'll be better for the household and better for the country and the government. Government are aware of this, so they've split maternity paternity leave, so the male can also take time in that first year to take care of the child, and also we can use it to help educate same-sex families, particularly same-sex male families, and encourage them to adopt or encourage them to have a child, because they're aware that they can be really good primary caregivers also. So I've just got a couple of exam questions. These questions were on the 2019 exam, and people really struggled when they saw these questions. The role of the father wasn't necessarily put out as quite a big topic, and there was 8 marks on this section. So have a go at these questions. It's 8 marks, so maybe 10 to 12 minutes should take you to answer these questions. Okay, so we'll look at the mark scheme for question number 1. So this is a question that's on a scale, so it would be levelled answers. So for a level 4 answer, you would have to have sufficient detail, and you would have to show that you have a sound knowledge and understanding. Whereas if you're in the lower band, then you've probably just outlined some of the things but haven't referenced research. So we've got Sharon Emerson that you can talk about the idea that the father provides play and stimulation, etc. Or you might have put some information in there as well to say that actually they can be primary caregivers. And then for the second question, these are economical implications, so talking about the idea that mothers can go back to work, and we can reduce the gender pay gap, it's linked to laws for paternity leave, etc. And then the last one, the early attachment one, you probably won't have mentioned that because we haven't really gone into Bowlby in any detail yet, but you might want to make a note of something that you can add to that as well. So you didn't need all of those points for the 4 marks. You could talk about 2 of those points in quite a bit of detail or just one in lots of detail. Again, this would be a levelled answer. If you're not sure about your answers or what mark you would get, you can always just put a comment and I'll look at your work and I'll go through and I'll check those answers for you. Okay, so if you do the quiz for all of the week 1 of attachment lessons, so that's role of the father, stages of attachment and caregiver-infant interaction, when you finish this, that would be great.